Hello and welcome to Gardening at 58 North. So in this video I'd like to give you guys an update on my Paulownia trees. Now all the Paulownias I'll be showing you I grew from seed. They're all hybrid Paulownias. They're supposed to be a hybrid between 3 different species, and they should have all had the same genetics, but I think they're actually a second generation hybrid. So someone's collected the seeds from the original hybrid, and then I've got those seeds, and those seeds have got lots of different genetic variation, so they're all slightly different plants. So this one here has been the best one for me so far, with the biggest leaves. You can see the leaves are really large, and it's grown to 3.50 meters this year. Really good growth rate. Now last year it didn't grow quite that tall. It was still a good amount of growth, but what I do every year now is I cut it down to almost to the ground level, and that encourages this really rapid growth with the giant leaves. So this was cut down around about March time to about 20 centimeters in height, and I'll show you some photos of what this bed looked like back then. It was quite empty. This was just a small stump, and it kind of sat there for a while. Because this is almost a subtropical plant, it is a temperate plant, but it likes a warm temperate climate, so it doesn't really do very well in my climate where it's quite cool. So it doesn't start growing until quite late in the year, around about June, July time. It's quite slow for the first month or so, and then it really takes off and grows very fast. So you can see how big it's grown. Quite short internodes as well, the spacing in between the leaves, and the leaves are really, really large. It's a really nice looking tree, so I'm quite happy with how this one is done. Hasn't got any side branches. I have been removing any side branches as they form to make sure it continues to grow tall and straight. And what I'm growing it for is the giant leaves. I'm just growing it for the nice kind of tropical appearance in my tropical bed. And certainly when it was younger and the leaves looked healthy, it was really interesting to see those giant leaves in and amongst the rest of the bed. And it gets up to a good height before any of the rest of the bed starts to grow. So even though it's a bit slow to get going, it makes up for it as it grows really fast, and I get some nice giant leaves around the middle of summer before the rest of my plants really start to grow. So I'll go in now and show you the stump. So this is the stump down here. As you can see, I've got a couple of smaller shoots. I've cut these off to just encourage that one shoot to grow, but this is the point that it grew from last year. As you can see, I cut it off at that point. It then grew this one from lower down, but this one is actually quite a bit bigger than the last year's shoot, and the main trunk itself is particularly large now. This is only, I think, 3 growing seasons it's had. It's a bit less than 3 years old, more like 2.5 years old. But it's already got quite a substantial trunk there. And that's considering that I cut it down every year. So I'm really happy with how this one has done this year. We did have a really hard winter, but the winter isn't really going to cause much damage to this tree. This one is fully hardy, should survive down to -30. Now I have got a lot of genetic variation in my plants, so some of them have been frost damaged, but this one hasn't shown any signs yet. What I do find is the very tip at the top does get a bit of frost damage, but as I cut that down to the ground every year, that's not a problem. And the reason that gets frost damage is at this time of year you can see it's still actively growing, and we'll get the first frost soon, so the actively growing tip at the top dies off, but the rest of the stem is fully hardy as it's already lignified and it's become woody. That's the update for this one. This, as I say, is my best one, largest leaves, and really been looking nice all summer. It's a shame it's looking like this now, but I just wanted to wait till the end of the year to show you its full height, to show you how big it's managed to become. Now I'll walk you over to the rest of my garden where I've got a few more in pots. I won't go over much detail about these ones because they haven't really grown much being inside pots, and I've gone over them a lot in the other videos about all the different leaf shapes, and the leaf shapes do vary quite a lot. But you can see I've got one down here, and this one's got very rounded leaves. I've got another one, these leaves are a little bit more pointed. And then you can see we've got this tiny one down here which has got much more serration on the leaves. So the leaves have got lots of little indentations along the edges there. I've got one in the corner just over there, and a couple that they're kind of in the ground. What they are, they're in the pot still, but they're rooted through the bottom, so these ones are growing a little bit bigger. There's one that's quite large, which is this one at the back. You can see here growing up amongst the sunflower. This one actually is a root sucker. So what happened is last summer I had one growing in a pot. I didn't realize it had rooted into the ground, and then when I pulled it up in spring to do some work and plant some sunflowers, I snapped the roots off from the bottom of the pot. So I've still got the original plant, and this is just some of the thicker roots that went down into the ground. And what's happened this summer is it's grown over 1 meter in height now. Even though it was shaded by the sunflowers, it's still growing quite well. And there was actually 2 roots in the ground, so either side of the pot. You can see down here one of the roots is much bigger than the other. That's the one at the back, and then we had that small one at the front. So it's very easy to propagate these plants. You can do root cuttings and they'll grow up no problem. So I'll definitely have to remove this one at some point because it's going to get too large and it's not really in the right place. But that one's done really well with being in the ground and really getting its roots established. So I find with these Paulownia trees, if you do grow them in pots, they do stay very small. You definitely need the root space for them to grow large. And what I'm going to do is maybe plant 1 or 2 of these in the garden. Now I did have 1 or 2 flower in previous years. This year I didn't have any flowering, and it doesn't look like there'll be any flowering next year either, because these flowers actually form in autumn time, and I would have expected to see some of these flowers already by now. So it looks like these won't be flowering for me, but I was actually quite surprised that they managed to flower in their first year, because normally they need to be mature plants before they flower. So these are all the Paulownias anyway in my garden. What I'll do now is take you to my parents' garden, where I've got a few planted there, and we'll see how they're doing. So this is now in my parents' garden, and I'll show you guys how the Paulownias are done in my parents' garden. Now these are all put into unimproved soil. It's quite a poor sandy soil, so they haven't had a lot of feed, so that's why they're all a bit stunted. But I'll give you a quick tour of them. So this is the first one here. This one has actually been in the ground for almost 2 years now. So when I first planted it, you can see it was around about that height there. Last year it grew up to this height, and then this year it's grown a bit taller. So it's been a bit slow. This is probably one of the best ones in the garden so far, because it's been here the longest. But the problem is, you can see it's behind this wall. The wall hasn't given it too much shade, but just to the south of it we've got a large plum tree. So until it gets a bit taller, it hasn't really had much light. It's also been a bit shrouded by grass and other weeds over the years, so it's grown tall and thin, not done too well, but hopefully it's getting its roots down, building up its energy supplies from the sun it is getting, and hopefully it'll shoot up in a year or 2, and once it gets to that light it should do much better. So that's one of the plants there. I don't think I need to do any technical cuts with this to pollard it down and get some rapid growth back up, because it's already got a nice straight stem. But I could always do that in the future if needs be. But I'm not going to cut this down to the ground unless it really needs it, because it's so shady here. I really need that height for it to get the light it needs. So the next one is just along here. This one was put in this year. This is a bit of a messy multi-stemmed one. You can see it's got loads of different branches coming up. All the ones I've selected for my parents' gardens are the ones with the smaller leaves, because it's a very windy garden here, so the small leaf ones should do slightly better than the large leaf Paulownia trees. So this one here has been struggling with a few weeds. It's the first year in the ground, so it hasn't grown that much. What I'll probably do this winter is cut that one down to the ground and encourage just one shoot to come up instead of the multiple shoots. And this one should do a little bit better than the other, because it's less shaded in this spot, and so it should grow hopefully a bit faster once it's got its roots down. So moving along, this is the next Paulownia. This one probably has some of the best chance to do well. It's south facing, so it gets light all day long. It is next to a large tree here, so it could have some competition with its roots, and it also has willow there, but it is in a very sunny position. It should do particularly well here. So this one struggled a little bit. The main stem died off and set up this little side shoot, but it's quite thick at the base. I think there's a decent amount in the lignotuber there, so I'm hoping next year, with this having a lot of sun this summer, this should hopefully take off and do well. We'll just need to make sure it's well fed, and hopefully that will get a bit of height in the next year or so. And out of all the Paulownias, I think this is the one with the most kind of round leaves. Doesn't really have any points, and it doesn't even have any serrations on the edge of the leaf. You can see there the leaf is very smooth, doesn't really have any indentations or anything. So the final Paulownia in my parents' garden is actually almost impossible to see now, because the leaves have come off. It is October time, and this is in the windiest spot in their garden, but it's also got the most amount of feed, because this is right in between the composting sites. Composting site's been here for 9 years. There's a lot of feed and nutrients leaching down into the soil here. So this one did actually do really well. So it was planted in a deep hollow, you can see down there, and it was this height when I planted it, and it's grown quite a bit this year, and it probably was stretching for the light. Once it got above the edging of the compost here, it put on some really nice big leaves. It looks really healthy and did look the best out of all the plants in the garden so far. And this was only planted this year. It's done particularly well. What I'll probably do is I might cut this bit off, because it's rubbing against the wood there. Just let it regrow from around about this point here, so we can have a nice straight stem. And I expect this one to grow really well. It gets a good amount of sunlight. It is rather exposed, so it can be a bit wind damaged, but it should shoot up quite well, this one, with all that extra feed from the compost. And because it's surrounded by the compost, there's no weeds or anything for its competition with its roots. There is a couple of trees nearby, but I think they're just far enough away, and there's that much feed and nutrients from the compost that it shouldn't be too much of an issue, and it should hopefully take off. So this one is probably going to be the fastest growing in my parents' garden for now, and I'll give you guys an update next year, and we'll see how it does. So that's all for the Paulownia updates for this year. I'll see you guys next year. Hopefully the ones in my parents' garden will get their roots established and get a bit better growth, because they are much slower. But as I said previously, my climate is really not the right climate for Paulownia trees. It's too cold in the summer, and the growing seasons are quite short, so they don't do that well really. It's only that one in my garden which has perfect growing conditions that really takes off and seems to be doing well. But we'll see how these other ones do. Hopefully once they get their roots established, we'll get a bit more growth. So I'll see you guys next year with the next yearly update on the Paulownia trees.